All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is the Center of Concern, and we would like to introduce Dr. Holland from Advocate Lutheran General, and she will go ahead and get going with everything. Thank you so much, Dr. Holland.
Hi, and welcome to everybody who's on. I'm Julie Holland. I am the Vice President for Pediatric Primary Care at Advocate Children's Hospital. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about COVID vaccines, and I'll go through some basic information and slides, and then there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions if there are any. So if you want to go ahead and advance the slide, first slide. Great. So I think hopefully this question has been answered for most people. Are COVID vaccines safe and are they effective? And I can give you a strong yes answer to both of those questions. I think we have a lot of evidence to show, and certainly hundreds of millions of doses have been given across the US and the world, and we have a really good sense of how safe those vaccines are. And in general, they're quite safe. People, as most of you know, have lots of local reactions, meaning their arm might be sore, they might feel bad for a day or two. Those are usually pretty transient. There are a few rare side effects, again, very small in number, certainly most of them self-resolving, and we can certainly get into that later, but not enough to dissuade anybody from getting this vaccine. And the vaccines are quite effective. I think that if you look at the effectiveness of the vaccines, the most important thing that they prevent is hospitalization and death, obviously. And the vaccines are somewhere around 94-95% effective against preventing that. We'll talk a little bit about boosters because there is some wearing off of the side effects, and we know for certain people they're not as effective as other people. Certainly people who have immune system issues are not able to mount as good of a response, but the vaccines are remarkably effective in preventing the really serious outcomes of COVID, which is hospitalization and death. Next slide, please. So there are 3 available vaccines in the United States. I think most people are aware that they are from Pfizer, from Moderna, and from Johnson & Johnson. Pfizer and Moderna use similar technology, the mRNA technology, which has been around for a couple of decades in research, but this is really the first large-scale use of it in a vaccine given to hundreds of millions of people. There certainly have been other vaccines that have been developed with mRNA technology, but nothing really available in widespread use. And the way that this works is the mRNA is a messenger. It gets injected into the body, and then it sends a signal to the cells to make a certain protein called the spike protein that occurs on the virus. The body then sees the spike protein and realizes that it is a foreign protein and makes antibodies against it, so that your immune system is really primed and ready to go. If it does see any actual COVID virus, it can send its antibodies directly to the source of the virus and take care of it before you get sick. Johnson & Johnson does not use that technology, but it is also quite effective. So I think, again, most people know that if you get Pfizer, you need 2 doses 21 days apart. If you get Moderna, you need 2 doses 4 weeks apart or 28 days apart. Johnson & Johnson was originally approved as a 1-dose vaccine, and there's been a recent recommendation that people get a booster or second dose of either Johnson & Johnson or the other vaccines 2 months after their first dose. Again, as a pediatrician, Pfizer is the only one approved for kids under the age of 18. So if you have a child who's under 18, that's the one that they're going to get. Okay, next slide, please. So who should get the vaccine? Well, really everyone should get this vaccine if you're 5 years of age and older, and for a number of reasons. So for those people who are at high risk for COVID, elderly folks, people with immune conditions, we'll talk about that later. That's the group of people that are at the highest risk of being hospitalized and dying from COVID. So it's really important for everybody who has an immune system issue or other medical problem to get the vaccine. But even apart from that group, there are a lot of people in their 20s and 30s and 40s that are currently in the hospital with the new Delta variant that we've seen in the last several months. And we're seeing much higher rates of infection, illness, hospitalization, and death in these younger, healthier age groups. We've seen, I think everybody is aware that kids are less likely to get sick, but that does not mean that kids don't get sick. And certainly kids with pre-existing conditions, or sometimes just regular healthy kids, get really unlucky and get a really bad case. And there have been tens of thousands of hospitalizations across the country in kids for COVID. And unfortunately, there have been about 750 pediatric deaths from COVID so far in the pandemic. And that's a lot of kids to lose in a year and a half to a disease. Just as a comparison, if you look at flu vaccine or flu virus, influenza, we often see somewhere around 100 kids a year dying of influenza. And this is 750 kids in about a year and a half. So even though most kids have mild illnesses, there are a lot of kids that don't have mild illnesses and wind up in the hospital. And not just from COVID, there's certainly, I think, some well-publicized problems after COVID, either kids and adults that have long haul or kids who are at risk for this inflammatory disorder, this multi-system inflammatory disorder that winds them back in the hospital a few weeks after COVID. So definitely something we want to avoid in all groups. So the vaccine exists not only to protect people individually, but really to protect our whole community. There are a lot of folks in our communities that for allergy reasons or other reasons are not able to get vaccinated, or they can get a vaccine and it doesn't work quite as well. It's not quite as effective. And I think, as we've done in the past with smallpox and polio and lots of other diseases, the way we protect everybody is to get as many people who can be vaccinated. That really protects everybody. It protects your mother, your grandmother, your neighbor, the kid in your child's class who has cancer, who's on chemotherapy. There is this component of really doing the right thing for your community, in addition to doing the right thing for yourself and your family. So again, if you are a child under age of 5, there is no vaccine currently approved, but for everybody 5 and over, the 5 to 11-year-olds just got approved a week ago. Everybody else can certainly choose from any of the vaccines listed on this page. Okay, next slide. So as I said before, there are certain people who really need this vaccine. And if they haven't been vaccinated, they really need to get it as soon as possible. We know that older folks age 65 and older are much higher risk for being hospitalized and having more severe COVID. And then adults with diabetes or heart conditions, dementia, folks that live in assisted nursing, obesity, smokers, people with immune system problems, all those groups of people have much higher rates of winding up hospitalized and dying from COVID. So we really want to do what we can to really prevent those groups that are at highest risk. When the pandemic first started, we really saw terrible rates of terrible rates of COVID and in nursing homes. And most of the deaths were with nursing home residents in the very early stages. They were the most fragile and the most at risk. And what we've seen is a lot of those people have been vaccinated. And really what we're seeing now is people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s being the people that are higher risk, largely because most of our older population has been vaccinated. Next slide, please. And then I think there's been a lot of discussion in the media and a lot of confusion about vaccine boosters. Who is eligible for a booster has kind of changed over time, and the number of people has increased. In the very beginning, I think the FDA and the CDC were being very careful and looking at the data, making sure that they had good evidence that people really needed boosting. And I think what's become obvious over the last few months of doing this is that most people's immunity and protection against COVID from the vaccine starts to wear off or wear down a little bit at that 6 to 8 month marker. So the recommendations have kind of slowly rolled out that initially it was just the elderly, and then people with immune system problems, and then people who worked in high risk conditions or people who lived with people at high risk conditions. And that number of people gets bigger and bigger. I think we're very close to having a general recommendation for everybody get a booster. There's really no good reason not to, unless somebody had a severe reaction to the vaccine. I think it would probably be in most people's best interest, and we'll see that recommendation coming fairly soon. And you can mix and match, meaning if you got a Pfizer, you can get a Moderna for the booster. I think the general recommendation for Moderna and Pfizer is that getting the same one would be fine. For Johnson & Johnson, there's actually some evidence that using a different vaccine, either the Moderna or Pfizer, to boost it sometimes has an even more protective effect than just getting a second Johnson & Johnson. But again, I think people have been a little bit confused because the eligible conditions keeps changing. And in fact, it just keeps expanding. And so there isn't a group of people that shouldn't get a booster. There's just groups of people that are highly recommended to get it now. And as I said before, I think it'll be fairly likely that it'll be recommended for most people to get one within in that. Once you've hit that 6 to 8 month period after your vaccine, your protection has gone down a bit and it's time to start thinking about a booster. I will say that for kids, there's currently no recommendation. The pediatric vaccine rolled out a little bit later than the other vaccines. So we're still looking at the data and we'll see if kids need it. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, it was very exciting as a pediatrician to have this vaccine be available for kids 5 years of age and older. I was working in a COVID vaccine clinic this weekend for 5 to 11-year-olds, and there were a lot of excited kids and parents. This really, I think, for a lot of people reflects, one, the ability to protect your own child, but also allows kids to really re-enter the social milieu of their activities. It allows them to do things like, family holidays where they have lots of parents and grandparents who may be at high risk. It reassures family that they can protect everybody. I have a lot of kids who are very excited to resume their indoor activities, who are very excited to go to their grandparents for Christmas. We're very excited to do lots of things. And I think, again, this will protect kids individually. It'll increase the number of people who are vaccinated, which really lowers the risk of COVID for everybody. And again, it's only the Pfizer vaccine. That's the only one currently available. But the vaccine has been quite safe in clinical trials. Most of the side effects seen were the same ones we see in adults, but at lower doses. The pediatric vaccine is 1/3 of the dose of the adult vaccine. And so most of the side effects, I think 8 or 9% of kids got fevers. Probably half of kids got sore arms. And then there were 1 to 2% of kids who got the more severe adult side effects, like feeling terrible for a day or two, fatigue, chills. Again, we didn't see very much of that in kids. The side effects that we've heard about with some of the adult vaccines, the heart inflammation, the myocarditis, is a pretty rare side effect in adults. It tends to occur in teenage and 20-year-old males, tends to be very mild. They didn't see any of those cases in the pediatric trials. Now, granted, it wasn't a huge number of kids, so we may start seeing a little bit of that, but the risk is thought to be low. And even people who got that recovered pretty quickly. I will say also that inflammation in the heart, that myocarditis, you can also get that from COVID itself, and it's much more generally serious. And when you get it from COVID rather than from the vaccine tends to be fairly mild. And again, I think we talked about the reasons that we should consider getting those for kids. Next slide. So just wanted to, I hope you found that informative, and we'll certainly be available to answer any questions. I don't see any questions in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, Nicole, I'm not sure if you are on mute or you are still available, but I'm certainly happy to take questions if anyone has any.
Well, if no one chimes in with any questions, I just wanted to really thank you for taking time out of your day to share your expertise, Dr. Holland. This was great, very informative, concise, exciting time with the vaccines rolling out for pediatrics. So I'm very excited to have you on.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I believe pretty strongly in this vaccine. I think it's a really important thing to allow those of us in the US and in the world at large to kind of resume life as it was pre-COVID, and looking forward to that. So thanks for having me on.
I agree. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye-bye.